Okay, so since we had such a good time last year learning Rebbe Nachman, so I figured we're going to learn another piece by Rebbe Nachman about his Bodhidus. This is a much deeper one. I think the last one we had was a nice introduction to the concept of speaking to Hashem in our own language. Now he's going to speak about the deep benefit that accrues when one does implement this practice. Besides just the simple things we said last time, which were obvious, I think everyone, as we were describing them, everyone said, yeah, that makes sense. Of course, that. How did I ever not think of that? Right? How did I ever think that you could just jump into Shemona Esrei without ever learning how to have a conversation with Hashem? And the relationship is obviously built in your own language, and the emotions are obviously accessed in our own language, and therefore davening in Hebrew is really almost a different avoda. It's a whole different act that a person's doing. Regular tefillah is in our own language. So here, he's going to discuss a very deep concept about what a person who does this regularly can accomplish. And it's a lot more than just having a relationship with Hashem. It's a lot more than developing your midos. It's a whole system that's going to actually be the key, according to Rabbi Nachman, to accomplishing our mission in the world. The goal of all mankind comes to fruition through the institution of his Bodhidus. So this is Rabbi Nachman in Likutei Moran, and this is Torah Nun Beis 52. So he always begins, very often at least, with Likutei Moran, with a quote from Chazal or a pasuk, and then he explains a much, much deeper meaning than you'd get from the surface meaning. So here's a quote from Pirkei Avos. Rabbi Chanina ben Chachinai Omer, Haneir Balayla, so one who stays awake late at night, V'hamahalech baderech yechidi, and one who travels on the roads alone, Umefana libo levatala, and one who turns his heart to vanity, to empty things, just wastes time. Harei zeh mischayev benafsho. Behold, this person is responsible for his soul. I mean, mischayev benafsho usually means that you're responsible for your own death, for your own demise. It's the person committed philosophical suicide by, well, here it's actually, the first two are actually physical dangers, it sounds like, staying up late at night. So either that's because you're, again, wasting time and you won't be able to get up early in the morning, or it means there's a certain danger involved of being around late at night. The second one is certainly sounds like a physical danger, traveling alone on the road, right? That's hamahalach b'derech yechidi. And the third one is more spiritual, that the person who turns his heart to vanity, to emptiness, to wasting time. So all of these three are mischayev benafsho. They're obligated for their own life, meaning they're responsible for their own death, is what he really means. Okay, so that's what the simple meaning of Pirkei Avos is. So now Rabbi Nachman is going to get into a very deep concept. This is going to be he begins with more of a philosophical conversation, but then it gets practical and plugs it into his Bodhidus and Tefillah. So let's begin. Ki yesh apikursim she'omrim sha'olam hu mechuyev hamatzius. So this is Rabbi Nachman speaking 200 years ago, so you can imagine how much this would apply today. But he says there are heretics that try to argue that the world exists independent of anything else. It exists forever. It's called what he calls mechuyav hamatzius. It must exist. Here they translate it as unconditional reality. Now those that argue that the world must exist, it always existed. Nothing created it, and it's not dependent on anything. And because of their wicked thoughts, it seems to them that they have proofs, chas v'shalom, mimin haga'olam. They can prove scientifically, they can prove with physics that the world was always here, it always will be here, and there's nothing that seems to speak the opposite. But in truth, they're just speaking emptiness. In truth, the world and all that fills it is a conditional reality. It's not mechuyev hametzius, it's efshari. Efshar means could be, it's possible. Conditional. It's a possible existence. There's only one thing in all of the universe that is what we call mechuyev hametzius, that must exist, that is unconditional reality, and that is Hashem. Everything else doesn't really exist. But everything else in the whole universe is all a conditional reality. Because Hashem created them something from nothing. They started with nothing, Hashem created them. And Hashem could have created them or could have not created them. Therefore, they're conditional. They don't have to be. They were Hashem's choice, that He decided that He wanted them to exist. So therefore, you see that the world and all that's in it is only a conditional reality. But where did this mistaken ideology that the world exists independent of anything else, where did it come from? How could they even believe that the world exists independent of Hashem? Listen to this concept. He says, now that the Jewish people exist, once the Jewish people were created, so now the world does have to exist. It does have to exist. It's now a mechuyev hametzius. It must exist. Ki kol ha'olam u'mala'o, because all the world and everything that fills it, hakol nivra ela b'shvil Yisrael. Kiyadua. It was only created for the Jewish people. That's why the world exists. Right? The world is the stage upon which the Jewish people earn eternal reward. That's right. 7 billion people. Right? That's all just a big stage. Those are all props on a stage, and the Jewish people are in the center. If you want a good mashal, look at the United Nations. Right? You don't have to look much further. All the nations of the world, so many atrocities and crazy things happening, and the center focus of everything is Israel, the Jewish people. So the whole world, it's a very beautiful mashal that Hashem created to show that there's a huge stage of the entire world, every single country, and who's on center stage? Little tiny Jewish people. That's who's on center stage. Because that's the way Hashem created the world. So it's going to reflect that. So if you get all the nations into one room, it's amazing that that's actually what is projected into reality in that place, is that the truth. Everybody says, the UN is a house of lies, but it's also a house of truth because the Jewish people are at the center of everything, and that is the truth. And we control the world for good or for bad. Whatever we do is what determines what happens in the world. So therefore now, after Hashem already created the Jewish people, so it's as if, it's not truly this way, but it's as if Hashem he's forced to create and sustain the world. Because now that He has a Jewish people, He needs a world to be their stage. Because it was on condition that there would be a world and a stage that He created the Jewish people. And that's why He created all of the worlds. But in truth, even the Jewish people are only an invention. They're only a creation of Hashem. So even they are not obligated unconditional existence. Because Hashem could have created the Jewish people or not created the Jewish people. So the Jewish people are also conditional. But the moment Hashem desired to create the Jewish people, then that demanded that Hashem create a universe and a world and existence. He had to. Because once He creates the Jewish people, so then He needs a world. He needs a stage. Because it was on condition that there would be a world, that He created the Jewish people. That the whole world is created for them, that they would ultimately control it and rule over it. And He says, and understand this very, very well. So therefore, everybody else in the world, all of these heretical nations that think that the world exists independent of Hashem, it's only because they're looking at from the perspective post-creation of the Jewish people. And post-creation of the Jewish people, that's the way it's going to look, because now the world does have to exist. Because as long as the Jewish people exist, there has to be a world. So they look at the world and say it has to exist, but they're missing the point. That's only after the Jewish people were created. But the Jewish people themselves are a conditional reality. Hashem could have created them or not created them. And therefore, really everything that's dependent on the Jewish people is also, in truth, a conditional reality. It doesn't have to be.
So most Jews, non-Jews don't confront this reality, because to confront it means that they'd have to admit that the Jewish people are special, and that irks them. That what makes them want to become more anti-Semitic.
Yeah, that for sure. No non-Jewish nation. This isn't like a scientific answer that's going to undo them. It's not going to play into their beliefs. But this is the truth. This is the way it is. So he says, "Mizen ishtalshel v'nimshach hata'u shel ha'apikursim she'omrim she'olam hu chas v'shalom mechuy v'metzius, aval be'emes rak Hashem yisbarach levad hu mechuy v'metzius." That's where they make the mistake, because they're looking at the world after the Jewish people already exist. But really, Hashem is the only thing in reality that must exist. V'kol hadvarim heim efshariyah metzius. But everything else is a conditional reality. So now listen to what he says. V'ikar hakavana shebara kol ha'olam b'shvil Yisrael haya kadesh Yisrael yasu ratzon. The whole reason for creating the world, the universe, and everything in it was so that the Jewish people would fulfill the will of Hashem. That they would connect and cling to their source, to their root. That they would ultimately return and become subsumed into Hashem. Ultimately, the Jewish people are going to go back. That's what we spoke about last time. When Hashem created Olam Haba, we said, why do you have to create this world to earn Olam Haba? Because so you wouldn't get the bread of embarrassment and get it as a free gift. He said, why do you have to get it? Why does he have to make it that way that you feel embarrassed from getting a free gift? He could have made it that everybody really just doesn't feel embarrassed when they get the free gift, and then he could have got it straight to Olam Haba. And we said, no, because Hashem wants you to be like Him. The greatest good in the world is to attach to Hashem. The way to attach to Hashem is to be like Hashem. Hashem is unique in that He is the source of His own existence. And therefore, the greatest good a person can receive is if he is the creator of his eternity. He is the creator of his eternal reward. By earning it in this world, he becomes like God in that he is the source of his existence in the next world. So he said that's the goal, is ultimately to become close and like Hashem so that we become absorbed into Hashem in the future. And then we really exist. The pleasure of being attached to Hashem is that you really exist. Until you're attached to Hashem, you don't really exist. Right? Nimsa kol ma sheYisrael osim ratzono shel malkom v'nichlim b'shorsham shu mechuyev b'metzius aydezen nichla kol ha'olam shenivra b'shvil mechuyev b'metzius. So the more that the Jewish people fulfill the will of Hashem, the more that the whole world, which is only there for the Jewish people, also becomes connected back to Hashem. It becomes an unconditional reality. Ki ikra tachlis shenivra olam hu b'shvil zeh v'rak b'shvil zeh mechuyev Hashem yisbarach kaviyachol livru l'kaim kol lamos b'shvil Yisrael kadesh yasu ratzono. Because right, the world is created for the Jewish people to fulfill Hashem's will, and once we're fulfilling His will, then the world has to exist because we're fulfilling our purpose and we're connecting back to Hashem, and the world, which is our tool, is connecting back to us, back to Hashem. So then everything is really becoming reality. It exists. Valkein az daika keshaosim ratzona nichlal olam bebechinas mechuyev metzius ki kol ma sheosim ratzona yoser hem nichlim beyoser im kol olamas atlim behem mechuyev metzius. The more we do Hashem's will, the more that the world and everything in it that we're utilizing, the more that it exists. Ki ayidei sheosim ratzona yisbarach hem choser menichlim bo yisbarach shu mechuyev metzius ve'az nichlim mehem kol olamas atlim benafshem mechuyev metzius. Then everything exists. So we said, I think we said it one time, maybe not here, but when you get to the next world. So Rav Kellerman, the Rebbe of Mikolo, he used to always say, imagine like a magnetic field that exists, and you're passing from this world, and on this side is the next world, as you have to pass through this magnetic field. Anything that aligns with the Ratzon Hashem, anything that aligns with the will of Hashem, that can exist on the other side of this field, because this field is the field of reality. The only thing that really exists is Hashem and His will. Evil, or anything that's against the will of Hashem, will disappear kulo ke'ashan yichla, like we say by Rosh Hashanah, that it's all going to disappear like smoke. It's going to poof out of existence. Because nothing exists other than Hashem, and therefore anything that's aligned with Hashem exists. Anything that goes against Hashem does not really exist. Hashem makes it appear to exist in this world, so that we have free will. But the moment that we get to the end game, and you enter into Olam Haba, so then whatever aligns with Hashem exists, whatever doesn't, it disappears when it passes through this magnetic field. So he says you're going to be standing there and you're going to go down the conveyor belt, and then if you're a person who's filled with mitzvahs, so on the other side, your hand is going to actually appear. But if you're a rasha, if it's a wicked person that has used all of his kochos and all of his gifts and abilities to go against Hashem, as he passes through that field, he's going to disappear, or he'll have one finger and a mangled hand. And he's going to look like a paraplegic on the other side. He won't be able to move. He's going to be missing limbs because he doesn't really exist. Parts of him don't exist. It's not just him, but everything in the world, he's saying here, whatever we utilize to fulfill the Ratzon Hashem, it will have an eternal reality. It will, at least in the moment that it's being utilized, you're connecting it up to the will of Hashem, and it exists. So you shake a lulav and esrog, that lulav and esrog is now being utilized to fulfill the will of Hashem, and now that lulav and esrog exists. It's an amazing thing, right? I don't think you realize you asked them. There's no. Right? So that lulav and esrog will exist. If a person gives tzedakah, so that money that he utilized, that will exist forever. The money that he spent on the vacation to Mexico, so that will not exist. When you get to the other side, that disappears. It's like they're investments. Whatever is invested into fulfilling the will of Hashem becomes real, and it goes with you. Not the physical object, but the essence of the object, the soul of the object is going to go with you to the next world. It's going to pass through the magnetic field. Whatever doesn't is not. So that's what he's saying here. So now he's going to get into how this concept is connected to his bodhus. So he says, Ach lizgot lazeh lihikalel b'shorsha, to actually merit to being connected to our source, tahainu lachzor lekalel ba'achdus Hashem yisbarach, to return to our source in Hashem, which is the ultimate reality. Ze'i efshar lizgos ki al im al yudei bittul. The only way for a person to really, really connect himself to Hashem is by nullifying himself. Shivatel atzmo legamrei, that he completely nullifies himself, ad sheyihya nichlal ba'achdus yisbarach, until he is connected and he melts into Hashem's oneness. Right? If you exist, so you go against Hashem. If you nullify yourself, you connect to Hashem. The greatest human being that ever lived, Moshe Rabbeinu. What was he known for? Anav mikol adam. He was the most modest of all human beings, the most humble man that ever lived. He had the least ego, the least of it, the least of himself. So therefore, he had the most of Hashem, because he emptied himself out. So Hashem filled him up. So the extent to which a person nullifies himself is the extent to which he will connect to the oneness of Hashem. So how do you get to bittul? So that's really the question. And this is in Chassidus all over the place, that the goal is bittul. You got to get to bittul. You have to nullify your ego, nullify your bad midos, nullify your will to Hashem's will. Meaning you're still going to be, a lot of, I'll ask a question like this. I'll ask the question like this, that the Mishnah says, Al tiyeh ke'avadim hameshamshim es harav l'kabel pras. Don't be like the servants that serve Hashem to receive a reward. Ela iyu ke'avadim hameshamshim es harav shelo manas l'kabel pras. You should be like the servants that want to serve the master, not for the sake of the reward. So you would ask the question, what's greater if you had your spouse buy you a beautiful gift out of nowhere? It was exactly what you wanted. She bought you, you want a new bicycle. She bought you your favorite bicycle. She did all the research. She was listening for the hints. She was asking questions without letting you realize that was her intention. And then you show up and boom, there's this awesome, amazing bicycle there for you. I feel amazing. Now, how would you feel if you told your wife, can you please buy me this bicycle? And then she went and she bought it for you. Which one feels better? Right?
Your wife's surprised.
So the surprise, she did it for you. She cares about you. She thought of it on her own. You didn't have to tell her, of course. So why is it, right? The Mishnah didn't say, serve Hashem, it's better to serve Hashem than to not serve Hashem. Because that's obvious. Better to do Hashem's ratzon than not to do it. It was strange. It said, no, do it for the sake of the master's command and not for the sake of your own goodwill. It's weird. If anything, Avram Avinu should be more beloved to Hashem than anyone that lived post Matan Torah. Avram Avinu kept the whole Torah because of his deep love for Hashem, and because he was so in tune with Hashem's desires, with the Ratzon Hashem, that he was able to perceive all the mitzvahs before they were given. It's amazing. He knew exactly what the purpose of all of creation was, and he utilized everything in line with the Ratzon Hashem. That's amazing. But then Hashem says, no, you know what? That's nice, but that's not as good as the guy who I commanded, and he's listening to my instructions. Doesn't make any sense. Totally counterintuitive.
Right.
So there's different answers. I'll give one answer, not the answer I'm looking for, but one answer is that when you serve Hashem because you were commanded to do so, then the Yetzer Hara rears his ugly head. When you want to do something out of the goodness of your heart, the Yetzer Hara says, okay, go ahead, you can do whatever you want. But when Hashem says you have to do this, sometimes it becomes more difficult. You ever been told to do something when you're a little kid? And you would do it on your own, but once the teacher told you to do it, now it's like, no, I don't want to do it. But it's not just a psychological reality, it's that you have a Yetzer Hara. You have an evil inclination that's given to you and tasked with trying to go against Hashem. That's his mission, and he's inside of you. So if you get commanded to do something, you're doing it because you're commanded, now you have to battle the Yetzer Hara, and that's the whole purpose of being in the world. So that's one answer for why it's better to serve Hashem once you're commanded, because now you have to fight the Yetzer Hara, and now you're really going to earn the reward, because the Pum Tzara Agra, according to the difficulty, is the reward. That's one answer. But here's the answer I was more looking for, is that if you do something and it was your own idea, and it was the desire to do that thing was generated from within, so the most that action will ever be is an expression of you. It can never be more than you, because it was an expression and a manifestation of you. You wanted to do the thing. So the greatest that act will ever be is limited to however great you are. But if you do something that was commanded to you by the king, so then when you're carrying that out, you're a shliach of the king. You're a messenger of the king. And therefore your greatness is not limited to your own. That action is not limited to your perception, to what you understand, to what you desired. It's actually connected back to the will of the king. And the king could be so much greater than you. The king could have a much broader perspective of how this action is going to affect the whole geopolitical situation, and it's going to have butterfly effects throughout the entire world, and there's so much more that was happening there. And the kavanah behind it was so much greater, and the altruism was so much greater if it was a good deed, that the king knows that this person deserves this from 20 years ago when he did something for the king. And there's so much more that can be included in that action when it's connected back to the king, which is so much greater and so much broader than the person himself. So therefore, if you serve Hashem because you want to do the thing, so it's limited to you. It's as big, the action itself is as big as you are. If you want to serve Hashem because He's the king, and you want to be a messenger of the king, so now shlucho shel adam kemoso. Gemara says the shlich of a person is like the person himself. He's an extension of the person. So you're now an extension of Hashem. So you now connect back to Hashem. So you reach that greatness. So that's what it means when you nullify yourself, and you're serving Hashem because He commanded it, not because you want to do it. Meaning, now this is why I brought it up, because if you serve Hashem because you want to, so you do it to receive the reward. Right? You do it because you wanted to. You do it because you wanted to. So then, I actually brought the wrong chazal. Now I'm realizing it wasn't Shalom Manas. It was Gadol HaMetzuva Va'oseh Mina Eina Metzuva Va'oseh. I was like, as I'm thinking, I'm like, that's not the chazal. The Gadol HaMetzuva Va'oseh means it's greater to be commanded and do the thing than not to be commanded and do the thing. That's the chazal. Same concept.
I would think it's different. I think it's if you do it on your own because you want to, that's a greater level than the other level.
So that's what we just explained.
You just said the opposite.
No, I said that if you do it, that's what I said in the beginning, but you didn't hear the answer. The answer was that when you're commanded to do it, you're an extension of the king. Remember I just said that?
Yeah.
So that means that if you're commanded and you do it because you're commanded, you're greater than the guy who did it because he wasn't commanded. Because if you do it because you're not commanded, so then it's only a reflection of you. So it's limited to as great as you are is as great as the action can ever be. That's as great as the intent that is behind the action can ever be. But if you're doing it because the king commanded it, so now it's really the king's action that is being activated through you. So now Gadol HaMetzuva Va'oseh, it's greater to be commanded and to perform the act because now the action is an extension of the king. But if you weren't commanded, it's not an extension of the king, it's an extension of you. It's not an extension of the king. So that's why the goal in life is to be mevatel yourself. If you nullify yourself, so then you become a servant of the king. You become an extension of the king. That's what happens if you nullify yourself, because there's no more you, there's just him. So when you are a metzuva ve'oseh, when you're a commanded person that does, you do because you're commanded, so then you are the king. You are connected to the king. And in the next world, you're gonna exist. You're gonna be mechuyev hametzius. You're gonna be unconditional reality, because you're gonna be an extension of Hashem. And Hashem is the only thing that does exist. So if you're an extension of Hashem, you're gonna exist. However, even if you did the exact same action, but you did it because of your ego, because you wanted to feel good, because you wanted to do that act of kindness, not because Hashem told you to. So even though in this world it might be very nice, but it wasn't an extension of Hashem. So when you get to the next world, it might not exist.
But couldn't you say that Hashem gave you the idea to do the good deed?
You could, it depends why you're doing it.
It didn't come from nowhere.
But if a person does a good deed, at least this is what the Tanya says by the non-Jewish nations, they do it because it makes them feel good. It makes them feel appreciated. It makes them feel like they exist. Now that is ultimately, as sad as it is, an egotistical act. Of course we want that. It's much better than than not doing it. But that's an egotistical act. It's an act that comes and results from me. Meaning, if I were not to get any of that feeling from the act, I wouldn't do it.
How do we explain the concept of going lifnei shir sedin in this context? It sounds like a little bit of a continuation of her question, but more rooted in the mitzvah, but then going beyond the mitzvah.
That's a very good question.
What
So,
was the question?
lifnei mishur sadin means you go beyond the letter of the law. And we see very often in the Gemara that even though, according to the strict halacha, a person would not be obligated to, let's say, return the money to a person who he doesn't really owe it to because there were no witnesses or something along those lines. So that money cannot be extracted in court. Or even if the other person was wrong, there was a case in the Gemara where the workers of Rebbe Babrachana were unloading barrels of wine, and they broke the barrels of wine and spilled all the wine. So he took their clothing as a mashkan, as a collateral, until they paid back all the damage they caused. So he went to, I forget which other, maybe Rabbi Yochanan, and he said, give them back the clothing. And he says, that the halacha? And then he quoted a pasuk. He goes, yeah, that's halacha. And he quoted a pasuk like, taseh tov al taseh ra, like do the good and don't do the bad. Meaning be a good person, not like a halacha, like it was a real halacha. And then they came to him and they said, the workers said, we don't have anything to eat. That we just spent our whole day. They used to literally work, hand to mouth, right? They would work for the day and have that money to buy food. So they said, you have to pay us. He said, chutzpah. I mean, that's what he was thinking. You just broke my barrels. You destroyed all my wine. You didn't even, and evidently they were negligent. You wouldn't have done it if it was beyond their control. They were negligent. Right? They were just throwing the UPS boxes. They're just tossing it against the wall and smashing it. You get it all broken. So, and suddenly, and now they're asking for me to pay out of pocket. And he went back to that same other Amora and he said, yep, give them their money. And he said, halacha, dinhi, is this the din? This is the halacha? And he said, yeah, it's halacha. And he quoted another pasuk about being moral and being ethical, like being a nice person. So that the Gemara was telling you that no, there's something called lifnei mishur sadin. Now, here's the answer to your question. When he asked that other Amora, is this the din? Is this the halacha? Did he say, no, but I feel it's the right thing to do? What did he do? He quoted a pasuk. Meaning, he's showing even Hashem leaves a space called lifnei mishur sadin, going beyond the letter of the law, to be like Hashem, and to be even greater than what is demanded of the average person. That's the law. When you establish the law, you establish it for the lowest common denominator, or maybe even the rov bnei adam, the majority of people. You don't establish the law for the greatest human being of the generation, then no one will be able to keep the law. So, therefore, halacha is defining what is the right thing to do for the lowest common denominator. That doesn't mean that you're maxed out at that point. As long as there's a pasuk that tells you should go above it. When there's a pasuk, then Hashem is telling you can go above it. So then there is this concept, but it's not coming from you. It's not coming from you saying, I want to give the money even though I don't have to. The pasuk says that. Hashem says, I would love you to give the money even though you don't have to, because if you feel it's the right thing to do, or not if I feel it's the right thing to do, and Hashem says, I want you to give the money. So you give the money anyway. So when a person really nullifies themselves, they basically are a walking Sefer Torah. Because the Torah is the will of Hashem. That's our instruction manual. Torah shebichtav, Torah sheba'al peh, and all of the Gemara, and all of Medrash, everything. So when they say, I've heard a very nice shot in Das Torah. What's Das Torah? So in the ultra-Orthodox world, there's this concept called Das Torah, where they look at their Gedolim, their Talmidei Chachamim, as almost prophets. I don't know what to do. Let's ask Das Torah. Let's ask Das Torah. So sometimes it's not even asking posek, because maybe the answer is not in halacha, or it's not, or maybe the halacha is unclear, and maybe there's a lifnei mishur sadin aspect going beyond the letter of the law, and they want to know, what should I do? What does Hashem want me to do? So you go and you ask one of these great rabbis, the greatest of the generation, and they're called Das Torah. What does it mean, Das Torah? It means you're not asking him what he thinks. You're asking, what does the Torah think? That person you're asking, hopefully, if you call him Das Torah, he's emptied out his own desires and his own opinions long ago. A lot of times I'll get up in the drush and I'll quote something that a great rabbi said, and then people come up to me after like, where do you get off saying that? Or why'd you say that? Or who says that's right? I said, I'm not giving my opinion. This is not my opinion. I'm telling you what Rav Dessler said. I'm telling you what the Babich Rebbe said. I'm telling you what, and they're quoting a Gemara, or they're quoting something else, or a Shulchan Aruch. Like I quote the Shulchan Aruch and says, I don't think, and someone says, I don't think that's right. I don't think that's moral. You don't think it's moral? Well, it's not you versus me. It's you versus Hashem. So maybe you have to realign the way that you think. Maybe that means that you are not aligned with reality. with the ultimate good in the world, because that's what Hashem is. And sometimes they don't align very well. Sometimes they get confusing. Like if you were by the Makoshesh Eitzim in the Midbar, imagine. Let's put ourselves in NMB, in Bismanenu. So we walk out and we're walking down 10th Avenue, and we still have the Sanhedrin. Okay, that's the only thing I'm changing, is that we still have the Sanhedrin. Okay, and we walk down 10th Avenue, which happens to be in Israel at the time, because we're going to go to the Sanhedrin. So we're in Israel on 10th Avenue, and we're walking down the street, and you see your neighbor, who's a frum Jew, picking up sticks, gathering them together. And you say, hey, there's a malacha on Shabbos called me'amer, gathering together produce, things that came from the ground in their location where they were produced, where they were grown, which it's in his yard, that's where it fell. And he's gathering them together, and you say, hey, you're not allowed to do that. And you're there with your friend, and you both say, and he says, I don't care. You say, we are officially warning you, hasra, this is called a halachic warning, that if you do so, you are liable to the penalty of stoning. You'll be stoned to death. And he says, you guys don't know anything. I don't care. I know, I heard about that penalty. They're not going to do it to me. And he picks up the sticks and keeps going about his business. Okay? So what happens? You go to Sanhedrin, you tell them what happened. They take the people into custody. They take this guy into custody. They put him on trial. Certainly, there were 2 witnesses. There was warning. He acknowledged. He knew the punishment. He said he doesn't care. And what do we do the next day? Imagine, right out on 10th Avenue, we stone someone to death for picking up sticks.
There's 2 witnesses, throw them off the cliff first.
And they're the first. They're the first ones. And that death is like Gary's saying, we throw him off a cliff. Then we take a giant rock and we throw it onto him. And then if he's still alive, everybody pelts him with small rocks. Brutal, violent, gory. Terrible. Imagine seeing that. It happened. It happened in the Midbar. It happened to a person. That's what happened. So most people would say, this is not the religion of God. I do not subscribe to this. This is a travesty. And they would leave the fold. Right? Perhaps today that's what someone would do. But they're wrong. So why are they wrong? So this isn't really going to be, we don't need this answer. They're wrong because Hashem said they're wrong. But hypothetically, if you could see what happens when that guy picks up those sticks. So you're only seeing what happens in this world. What happens in this world? A bunch of sticks get put into a pile. But if you see what's happening in the higher world, remember there's many worlds and there's many beings in all these other worlds. There's whole structures and thousands of angels and they're just as alive as you and I are. And they have the right to life as much as you and I do. And when this guy starts picking up sticks, there's a giant earthquake and thousands of angels die and spiritual beings are destroyed. And it causes, and not only that does it affect that world, but that Chilul Shabbos in this world causes 50 people to die in India. A train crash because this guy was Mechalel Shabbos. Because you only see what happens right there in his front yard. You don't see what goes up and then what comes back down. Spiritual damage is what causes physical damage. That's where it all comes from. It's all from the Jewish people. Whatever we do here causes whatever is happening everywhere. I remember a big Rav once said to someone, you know why there's kids starving in Africa? And the person's like, yeah, because the rest of the world doesn't care about them. They don't send the money to them. They're not trying to help them. He says, no. It's because you don't say, Poseach Chesedecho Mazbil L'chol Chai Ratzon with enough kavanah. That's why. Not you, but we, the Jewish people. If the Jewish people would have that kavanah every single day and daven Baruch Aleinu the way that we should be davening, the bracha would flow into the world. The Medrash in Eicha says that when the Goyim destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, they didn't realize that they were doing more damage to themselves than they were to the Jewish people. All of the bracha in the world, all of the sustenance in the world flowed through the Beis HaMikdash. The world was filled with prosperity. Everything came through the Beis HaMikdash. They destroyed the Beis HaMikdash, the whole world went into a depression. It was terrible because everything comes from the Jewish people. So we only see what's happening right in front of our eyes, but there's a whole other system that's happening. So that's just if you want to maybe logically try to understand why it is you'd stone someone for picking up sticks. It's because he's not just picking up sticks. He's destroying the world. He's literally destroying the world. He's the most reckless, dangerous person ever to society. If there's a murder that's going around, would you not think that we should put him to death if you know he's going to murder again? Yeah, of course, right? He's a danger to society. This guy is more of a danger to society according to the Torah than that murder. He gets a worse death. He gets stoning. Stoning is the worst you get. Right? Skila. So he's more of a danger to society. And he is. You're just not going to see it right in front of your eyes. You're not going to see someone drop dead next to him for picking up sticks. But he's causing more damage in that world, and he's causing more damage in this world. That's what's actually happening. So we have to believe that. So where are we coming from now? So therefore, when a person nullifies himself to Hashem, he becomes Das Torah. That was this concept called Das Torah. Das Torah, someone once said, it doesn't mean that he knows a lot of Torah. It means he doesn't know anything but Torah. He doesn't know anything but Torah. That's all he knows. It's not that that's what he also knows Torah. Because it could be a person that has lots of Torah in his head, and lots of philosophy, and lots of science, and lots of politics, and lots of pop culture. There's a lot of stuff. He's just a very worldly individual. And there are people like that. They're super geniuses. They just know everything. And so then you have the Haredi world, the ultra-Orthodox world, that people say, oh, they're haters. They don't respect this guy. It's not that they don't respect him. They respect his books, and he can write beautiful things on Torah. But they don't consider him Das Torah, because he has a lot in his head that's not Torah. And he values the opinions of many secular psychologists and many secular scientists. And it's not to say that those people are all wrong and they don't have truth. But if you ask him a question, you're not necessarily only getting the opinion of the Torah. You're getting an aggregate of many different aspects of wisdom. So he'd probably be a good mentor. You could teach you a lot of information. But if you want a spiritual answer, like, what does God want me to do in this situation? So you can't ask him. If you ask him, you're going to be asking just a really smart expert. He's going to give you probably a really solid opinion. Not to say he's like not a good person, but you're not getting Hashem's opinion, because there's too much mixed into that Torah. You need Torah. So a person, how do you know Das Torah? The person has to be extremely humble. He has to be extremely humble, because you only want Torah there. I don't want his opinion. It's like sad. It's like almost disrespectful. You walk into like the big rabbi, you say, I really do not want your opinion. I want to know what Hashem has to say. And therefore I'm coming to you. That's the greatest compliment you can ever give him. He says, wow, you really think that I have no opinion of my own involved in what I'm going to tell you? That means I've reached a very high level of perfection. I've completely nullified myself to Hashem's will. And that's why you're coming to me? That's very flattering to a big person. He'd love to hear that. He wouldn't be offended. Saying, thank God you don't want my opinion, because I don't want my opinion. I try to get rid of my opinion every day to try to remove my personal bias and try to understand what the Torah wants me to do. So this is this concept of bittul. So when you mevatel yourself for the will of Hashem, you now are a walking, breathing Torah. You're the will of Hashem, incarnate, right, in the world. That's what you are. So now you're Mechayev HaMetzias. Not only that, but now you exist. You're the most real thing in all of the world, because you are Hashem's opinion. That's the most real thing in all of reality. So that's what he's saying here. So he says, how do you get to this? And we'll end with this now. Vi efshar lava lidei bittul, and it's impossible to reach bittul, ki'im al yadei hisbodedus. The only way to get to bittul, so I guess any person that reaches this level, they certainly have done this, is hisbodedus, by secluding yourself and talking to Hashem. Ki al yadei shemitboded u'mefarish sichaso beino levein kono, because by secluding yourself and speaking and having a conversation between you and Hashem, that is the path to nullifying all of your physical desires and urges and your bad midos that go against Hashem. The way to get rid of them is interesting. It's through hisbodedus. You think it's through character development, Musar Sfarim. I told you, this is like the catch-all. Hisbodedus fixes everything. When you read Rebbe Nachman, it's the key to everything. It enhances everything. And then eventually you'll nullify all of your physicality, and you will return to your source. You'll connect to your root. You'll connect back to Hashem. So this is only the middle of it, so we're going to continue next time. But this is this very deep concept of Rebbe Nachman. He's going to develop it further of what hisbodedus specifically does, when you're supposed to do it. This is where he describes how you're supposed to do it. Like, what's the ideal setting, time, location for hisbodedus. He's going to describe it here. But this is what he says the deeper goal is, not just to develop your davening skills and your relationship with Hashem, but to nullify yourself for the sake of Hashem. That happens through hisbodedus. So how is what we'll discuss next time.